Welcome, everybody. My name is Mary Pepe, and I am the chair of the 2023 Site Global Sustainability Committee. I'd like to thank you for joining our second webinar, and I know that this webinar will be very thought-provoking. I'd like to share with you that our committee is committed to provide our members at large and beyond all the information and resources that are required as we move towards a more sustainable world, and to help you in your efforts towards that. Again, I wish to thank you, and I will move this on to Olga Walker, who is from Site Scotland and is the co-lead of our education committee on our sustainability committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary, and warm welcome to everyone who managed to join us this afternoon for the second webinar on sustainability in incentive travel, championed by Site Global Sustainability Committee. My name is Olga Walker, and I'm Sustainability Ambassador at Site Scotland, as well as co-lead in education team at Sustainability Committee, together with Liz and Stein, my great team members who are both on this call today as well. It's great to see so many familiar names from our first webinar back in February, as well as many new names, and to see that our community of incentive travel professionals who are passionate about our industry being sustainable is growing, which is one of the missions of Site Global Sustainability Committee. For those of you who didn't manage to attend the first webinar in February, we focused on sustainability-related case studies from the destinations of Canada and Scotland. We had two great speakers, Virginie de Vischer from Destination Canada and Rory Archibald from Visit Scotland, presenting on their destination sustainability programs with a focus on all the three pillars of sustainability: environmental, sociocultural, and economic. We also heard case studies from Site Canada and Site Scotland chapters highlighting their sustainability agenda in education, events, and collaborations with local charities. We welcome all the attendees and chapters to join the forces with us and to help with planning of the future webinars, suggest topics, speakers, case studies, with the view to learn from each other and share practical tools specific to our industry. The importance of sharing the knowledge, the best practice, and practical tools was highlighted to us by many attendees of the first webinar in the survey we sent to everyone. Therefore, during this webinar, we decided to focus on the environmental pillar of sustainability, and specifically the two areas that directly affect our industry, which are the travel waste and the food waste. We are going to have two great speakers with us today who are going to be introduced later, who are going to share their expertise in these areas and offer solutions and practical tools that we can all use in our businesses. I would now like to introduce you to my colleague Liz Liegey, co-lead in education team of Site Global Sustainability Committee, who will add a few introductory words before we move on to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. Thank you all for joining us again for our second sustainability webinar. I have to say we have over 128 that have registered. We're thrilled to have you all. And I wanted to do some shout outs too who are here with us. We have chapters, site chapters from, of course, Site Scotland, Site Canada, Spain, France, Ireland, the UK. We have Mexico, Central America, South America, Midwest, Site Midwest, Mountain West, Southern California, Florida, Caribbean, Chicago, Texas, to name a few. We have also London and other cities. So thank you all for joining this very important webinar. I attended the Site Global Conference in New York last month and was just so encouraged by the conversations with sustainability leaders and just growing this community. It's an exciting time and an important time that we have to take action. It's Earth Month again. Happy Earth Month to everybody. And I'm wearing my green sweater from Ireland proudly. And so again, celebrating Earth Month, we've chosen this month as well to kick off our second webinar. So now I'd like to just speak to some housekeeping notes. We're going to have questions and answers following each speaker. So after we have our first speaker, we will have questions for about 5 to 7 minutes. And we ask you to post your questions in the Q&A box. And then the following speaker, we will do the same format. We'll take the questions and answers then. Okay. We will be recording the webinar as well, and we'll have a survey that we'd very much like you to contribute as we do take that information and use that for further seminars. So with further ado, I'd like to introduce our fantastic speaker, Ben Liegey, founder and operator of BetterTable.ca, a Vancouver-based benefit company helping food and beverage operations be more profitable. Ben empowers Green Key certified hotels in BC with training, food waste audits, and certification program to control costs, food costs, and increase profitability. Originally from France, Ben has 9 years of experience consulting companies throughout the food chain. He is also the producer of BC documentary about food waste solutions from farm to table, the Food Synergy movie. He is an executive MBA, and his role is to help hospitality leaders take control of their food costs and stop being frustrated with increasing food prices. So I'd like to introduce Ben. Please give a warm welcome. And Ben's going to share a really interesting, fun fact about him before he begins his enlightening presentation. Over to you, Ben.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, the whole team of Site Global for having me today. Yeah, fun fact about me related to travel. Like in the past, I've been traveling across 4 continents with no air travel to look at different initiatives around sustainable food. And so today I'm going to be focusing on environmental sustainability in incentive travel, but just with a food perspective. So as Liz mentioned, I'm basically the co-founder of BetterTable.ca, and I'm connecting from the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, which is also called Vancouver, BC. So here's what we have on the menu. So first, I'm going to share why food environmental sustainability is important. Then what kind of food certification can you trust in terms of sustainability? Tips to eco-design your menus, and then how to achieve a triple bottom line with food waste prevention. And then I'll share with you some resources so that you can learn more if you're interested. So yeah, at BetterTable.ca, we help hotels and restaurants to control food costs and improve the bottom line through like training, audits, and certification programs. And I invite you to check our website if you want to learn more about what we do. But I'm sure like whether you're like working in a hotel or like for events or you're just dining out, you've probably experienced like an increase in menu prices and of food prices, even when you do your purchasing for your business or for your own groceries. It's 25% on average increase in terms of food prices versus before the pandemic. So it's a significant impact on profitability of food and beverage operations. At the same time, the amount of food waste we're wasting is very significant. Like in the world, 1/3 of food produced is wasted. And in Canada, it's actually even worse. It's 58% of food that is being produced that is wasted. So it's a lot of that can be saved. And in terms of like monetary savings as well. Like, I have a quick question for you. In Canada, avoidable food waste is worth how many billion dollars per year? Try to think about a number. And many people don't necessarily know exactly like how much food is being wasted, even in their own business. And so really what is key is to be able to like track it first, because you can only manage what you measure. But before I'm sharing more of the solution, I'd like to share with you like the trailer of a documentary about food waste solutions from farm to table. I'm just gonna.
Flooding. What can we?
Okay.
It's really hard to read about climate change all the time and not feel really discouraged.
Wildfires, rising sea levels, flooding. What can we do individually?
There is so much food produced that ends up in landfill that we are having a direct impact on our climate. It does not make sense that we are not connecting these dots.
The amount of food waste in Canada is estimated to be something on the order of $49 billion a year. Over a third of the food that we produce never gets eaten.
We actually waste more food than we consume. And this is a really simple solution that everyone can participate in.
BC is a hotbed of innovation. BC and Ontario lead the country in innovative ways to reduce waste.
It's all connected, everything is connected, and it's all connected through these decisions and choices that we're making across the entire network.
We're all finding our common goal and our love for the passion of fighting food waste together.
I think such an important thing for people to remember when it comes to their involvement is that they are involved.
People don't know how to fight food waste, and they want to know.
All right, so that was just a quick taste of this documentary coming up soon. But what I wanted to share with that is that it's also a way, on top of improving your bottom line, to like attract new customers and to make sure you're aligned with like the new trends related to sustainability. I mean, according to Booking.com, it's approximately 80% of travelers who want to travel sustainably. And that also is being reflected in the choices they're making in terms of dining experiences. And at the same time, it's a huge climate opportunity because food waste accounts for 8 to 10% of total CO2 emissions. So it's like the carbon footprint of food waste is 4 times the carbon footprint of the aviation industry. Think about it for a second. It is just like so huge that it is the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter if it were a country after China and the US. And of course, it's good for the bottom line because like an average restaurant in BC like is spending more than $50,000 on food that is never eaten. And so that is something that you can definitely work on in improving your food and beverage profitability this way. So this was just a bit of context. I would like to share with you a few certifications that you could leverage to be more sustainable in your food operations. So here are the certifications that are related to ingredients. So on the left, you have some example of sustainable seafood certification. So like MSC, ASC, Oceanwise, or like organic food ingredients. Each country has its own certification system, but basically it means like no pesticide or low pesticides being used. So that's one way, focusing on the ingredients. Another way is also to focus on the sustainability of your operations. So on the left here, you see like the B Corp certification, the Green Key certification used in hotel and events, or the Biosphere Sustainable as well used in the industry. So this is more like an overall sustainability certification program. It goes across very different aspects of sustainability, but doesn't go deep into like certain aspects such as food. And then you have food sustainability certification, which are like the Pledge on Food Waste is one, or the Green Star from the Michelin is another one. So then I'm going to share with you a few tips on how you can eco-design your menus. So of course, like this is the basic, putting on your menus the plant-based items, or if you have organic and local ingredients, this is something that you should feature on your menu. And adding like the vegan, gluten-free, if you have such options, that's always appreciated, and that's nowadays it's like a must-have. Then if you want to go further, and I know some of you are interested in that topic, like you can also do the carbon footprint of your menus, either internally or to display directly on the menu. And here are a few tools that you can use, just putting the ingredients that you have in your dish and having an estimation from the carbon rating of your plate. Another suggestions would be to provide different options for different dishes, such as like salad and soups. So here on the right, you have what we usually see, like one size fits all. If you're like a small person or like a big person who did like 2 hours workout before, you will have the same size. So what about providing multiple options to be able to meet the needs of your customers and increase guest satisfaction while reducing food cost? This is something you can do with the menu that is on the left. So if you're a little hungry, you can have a small option. If you're very hungry, you can have a large portion. And here is another example, if you want to go even further into like how you can maximize the yields in your operation and making sure you use creative cooking to make sure you use most of the ingredients. And I'm sure you will have this in the handouts after the webinars, but that's an example. You will be able to check it out. So last but not least, like how to achieve a triple bottom line with food waste prevention. So we've seen it's like a real good way to like work on like increasing profitability, also leveraging the #1 solution to fight climate change, while also having a social, because like even in like a country like Canada, for example, 1 in 7 people are food insecure. So the first question you should ask yourself is like, do you have more plate waste or do you have more kitchen waste? First, are you able to answer that question? And if not, why are you not able to answer that question? And that's really because it's like everything, like in finance, like you can only manage what you measure. And on average, it's 7% of food revenue. So you'd better manage it, right? So if you want to manage that, you need to measure it. Here's an example of one of the food waste audits we've been doing, and you can use like a technology if you want to make it even easier. On average, this is a case study with 8 Hyatt properties, and they've been saving like $241,000 after 6 months. So using technology is a good way to monitor and track food waste efficiently. And of course, like showing the great leadership you have is another way. So here is an example with the Pledge on Food Waste certification program, where it's like 95 criteria solely focused on food waste. It's kind of, think about it like the equivalent of the Michelin stars, but for food waste. And it's a great way to know where you're at, benchmark properties, and also communicate positively to drive sales. And of course, like food waste is such a big issue that it has its own sustainable development goals. So the SDG 12.3, reducing food waste by 50% by 2030. So if you want to learn more about like how you can get a better table in your operations, we have a BetterTable Academy, which is free with different modules, and you can explore some of the solutions a bit more in depth. And so please have a look at BetterTable.ca/academy. Yeah, you will have a lot of insights on how to reduce what are the KPIs to track, how to reduce kitchen waste, how to reduce plate waste. And that was it for this presentation. So happy to answer any question you may have.
Thank you, Ben. That was so insightful and absolutely baffling just to hear. I mean, a figure of 49 billion of food waste. I mean, that just really puts in perspective and just the choices we make and how we can simplify to in little ways just to make impacts and just with the tools you've given us. Thank you for that. We have some questions here. Ben, can you recommend a company in Canada that picks up leftover food from hotels from corporate events and donates it?
Yes, so depending where you are, like I know in Vancouver Food Runners is doing an amazing job for that. And globally, I mean, nationally in Canada, Second Harvest is probably going to be your main contact point. But yeah, depending where you are, you have like some national players and some local players who can be also more effective in a way. So it kind of depends where you're located, but yeah, there are definitely many more and more organizations that can help you with that.
Excellent.
So I would suggest like, yeah, check out the Second Harvest website. And if it doesn't answer your questions, like feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to help.
Okay, perfect. Because they're the largest food rescue in Canada, correct? And
yeah.
And then you would have other suggestions for other countries globally, and that's great. And I think it's important to ask that question when you're dealing with venues. And what top 3 suggestions would you give hotels?
So the number 1 would be track your food waste. Like this, you can only measure to measure. So if you don't measure it, you don't manage it. Number 2 would be be creative with your ingredients. Like if kitchen waste is where you have the biggest opportunity, try to find creative ways, creative recipe to really make the most of the ingredients you have, to avoid buying more than what you actually need. And to, in sustainability, we talk about energy efficiency. I think we should also talk about food efficiency. And food efficiency is measured in like gram of food waste per cover. And that can be done for a hotel, that can be done for an event. And the third one would be, like if plate waste is one of your big options, try to like better understand what's happening with your portion sizes. Does it meet the expectation and does it satisfy your guest? Because what I always say is you should see an empty plate as a sign of guest satisfaction.
Excellent. Thank you. And I wanted to mention we have Stein Hubers from Hilton who's assisting with our questions and answers as well, keeping an eye. Thank you, Stein. Okay, we have another one. Can you explain the smart menu concept?
So smart menu concepts, can you precise a little bit? Like, is it the menu I shared earlier or is it something else?
I think what you shared earlier.
Okay.
Is that right, Heidi? Heidi's asked that. I believe it was what you shared.
Yeah. So it's about basically being creative with like zero waste ingredients. Like on our blog, we have a lot of zero waste recipes. One striking example, for example, is the one I did with a tourism organization a couple of weeks ago, was the whole banana bread. And so it's preventing food waste in 2 ways. Like first, because it's used imperfect bananas. So you buy from your supplier imperfect bananas that would normally be wasted. They're totally fine, but they are just perfectly ripe. So it's perfect for banana bread. And on top of that, like I'm maximizing the yield by also using this with organic banana, I'm using the skin as well. So it's just about finding, and people say, oh, you can use the skin. Like actually, yes, if you know how to cook it and how to process it, like you can make way more than what you think. And that's just one striking example, but that can be applied to many, many other ingredients.
Right. Thank you, Ben. We have from Haley Bishop. Hi, Ben. What are the questions you've we're often asked is to donate food afterward, but understanding it is sometimes cited as a food safety concern. Do you have recommendations for helping to navigate the concern? Great question.
Yes, so it depends on what type of food. If it's like prepared food, like this can be like needs to be stored in the fridge as soon as possible. Let's say if it's canned food and you have that, let's say some people don't know necessarily that even if it's past the best before date, you can still donate it. So that's something to have in mind that many people don't necessarily know. And of course, if it's being on a plate or on a buffet, that can be donated, unfortunately, but there are ways to design your operations to minimize that waste, and really like tracking first is the smarter things to do.
And if they're doing, for example, buffets, to do less on them and then just replenish and versus having the large displays would.
Yeah, or changing at the end, but yeah, there are definitely, depending on what makes sense in your operations, there are different strategies you can implement. But first you need to know where are your biggest opportunity. As long as you don't know that, you will spend a lot of time and money and efforts on one thing that may not be the biggest opportunity. You will need to focus to increase and maximize your return on investment.
Right. And then working with obviously your venue and your supplier, understanding that this would be your objective you want to reduce.
That's
yes,
right.
Hope that answers your question, Haley. Thank you. And we have from Fiona, can you repeat the name of the company to reach out for food waste? I believe that was Second Harvest, correct?
Second Harvest in Canada, nationally.
And then they have global connections as well. They can direct you to, correct? Or you can obviously, Ben.
Yeah, that's right. And so just to clarify, like what we do at BetterTable.ca, like we don't do food waste management, like composting. We don't do food donation, like Second Harvest. We really upstream how you design your operations to minimize food waste at the first place, because that's where you're going to save the most money.
Excellent. And Liz Holtby, I executed a corporate meeting last week in Ontario, and the hotel would not transfer the leftover muffins, Danish desserts, etc., to the coffee break. This adds to the food waste problem. They are worried about the health and quality of the food.
Yeah, and I mean it's happening a lot, and there is definitely a mindset to change here. What is really important is to have a communication across departments, because it's not, many people think, oh, food waste is like the chef's problem or the culinary team's problem. Like, no, if you work in marketing, you have an impact on the way you communicate around the different actions you're implementing. If you work in HR, you have an impact on training. If you work in finance, you're tracking food costs. So all of these people need to talk together to be able to make an impact.
Excellent. Collaborating, working together. Great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I think we had some really great questions here, and hope that's helpful. And again, feel free to reach out to Ben, and we again will be recording this and have the links in here for the resources. Okay, so I think I'll pass over. Thank you so much, Ben. That was so enlightening. A lot of great tools. We appreciate your time. And let's keep all working together to make a difference with our food choices and reducing food waste.
Thank you for having me.
Pass over to my colleague, Olga, and thank you, Stein, again for helping us with the questions and answers. We appreciate it. He's part of our education committee as well. Thank you. Okay, Olga, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben, and thank you to everybody for asking such great questions. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Teresa Moore, Director of AGF, A Greener Future. A Greener Future is a non-for-profit organization based in the UK and helping international events, venues, and suppliers to reduce their environmental impact. Teresa is also co-founder of Green Events and Innovations Conference. This is a leading sustainability conference designed specifically for events. Teresa is an internationally recognized speaker, consultant, researcher, and author with the focus on strategy and behavioral change. So very warm welcome to Teresa. And would you like to share an interesting fact with us to start with?
Thank you, Olga, and hello to everybody at Site Global. I guess if we're talking about interesting sustainability facts, a couple of years ago, just after we were released from lockdown, although it was temporarily, I did the West Highland Way, which is a 96-mile hike through the lowlands and highlands of Scotland. So I used my feet to travel that time.
Amazing. That must have been really beautiful.
It was absolutely wonderful, actually. It was the contrast between that sort of lockdown and then being out and about in such beauty. It's hard to describe. If anybody ever wants to do that trek or is a great hiker, I would seriously recommend it, because the countryside is just stunning in Scotland. So yeah, good one to do.
Thank you, Teresa. Right, well, if we could please have Teresa's presentation up.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to be talking about travel waste, and really the focus is on the emissions from all the traveling we do, certainly in your industry and to some extent in the events industry as well. And I'm going to focus on some of the issues, but also I want to talk about solutions, because I think it's too easy to slam aircraft travel, slam tourism, without presenting some solutions that we can all work towards to keep things going. We all love traveling, and I'm a big traveler like everybody else. So we want to focus on how we can maintain that, but mindfully travel. And then when we are creating emissions from our travel, what sort of solutions are out there to mitigate those emissions. So could I have the next slide, please? So on the sort of dirty side, we all know, I think, that transport and aviation is a big emitter of CO2. In fact, it's one of the big three, the others being food that we just heard, and of course energy. So these are the big three emitters, the big three problems that we really have to focus on if we're going to do something about climate change. When we look at the tourism sector, tourism accounted for 5% of all CO2 emissions. That's totally, and that seems relatively small, but when you look at travel emissions, it accounted for 22%. That's nearly a quarter of all travel generated emissions. That data came from 2016, and obviously in the interim we've had COVID, where the industry shut down, and we are in that recovery phase. But all the indications are that we will be back, if not already, to where we were before COVID, and those emissions are going to increase unless we are mindful and pay attention to trying to do something about them. And one of the focuses for doing something about them is offsetting. And that's what I want to really look at in this session, because offsetting is something that it's becoming mainstream, really. If you as an individual rather than the business book a flight, you have the option when you're booking to tick a box. Do you want to pay an X amount to offset your flight? Great, job done. But I think we really need to understand a lot more about what's happening when we tick that box, and what sort of contribution those offsetting schemes actually make. Can I have the next slide, please? But before I start, I think it's worth considering all the new language that we are confronted with these days. And it's part of what offsetting is about, but I think it's really important to just explain some of this language. Again, we see it used everywhere. It's mainstream for me in my work and many others. But what I'm also very conscious of is that people use these terms, or they're written about, and sometimes people don't seem to understand what they actually mean. They're relatively new, they're moving into our language quite quickly, but do we really understand what we're talking about? And I think for you, this audience, we should start with an explanation of scope 1, 2, and 3. Now, this is being used a lot. A couple of years ago, it would only be analysts, CO2 analysts, who were really focused on this type of language, scope 1, 2, and 3. And so I thought I'd just explain those because it's a big part of what your business is really. So scope 1 emissions are those emissions that we have direct control over and are a result of our business activities, very local business activities. Scope 2, we also have some control over, and they cover emissions from energy sources, electricity, things like steam, things like cooling. But we do have some control over those because we can mediate just how much we use. Scope 3, which is probably the biggest area of emissions for this industry, are the ones that we don't really have much control over. They're the ones that are emitted down the supply chain. And one of those factors, if we're booking flights, for example, travel and transport are a big scope 3 emitter. So that's why I really started with an explanation of those. So if you see those, you come across them in day-to-day, that's what they mean. And scope 3 is the one that we're really concerned with in this industry because we don't have the control over it that we say have over scopes 1 and 2, how much we use. But there are other terms that we really need to get a grip on, things like carbon offsetting. I'm going to focus on that particular term in a second, but also maybe one that you're less familiar with, but again, it's gaining ground, carbon insetting. Now, carbon insetting is sort of the local version of carbon offsetting. With carbon offsetting, we're looking at schemes to balance out our emissions. Carbon offsetting, insetting focuses on local schemes to do that, whereas carbon offsetting might be global schemes. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Net zero, what's the difference between carbon offsetting and net zero? I'll explain that in a minute because these are absolutely key to what we're going to look at in this session. But other terms, what's the difference between carbon neutral, carbon negative, carbon positive? Lots of these terms used quite frequently. Carbon positive, emitting carbon. Carbon negative, not emitting carbon. Carbon neutral, we're in a stasis. Eco-balancing, what does that mean? Lots of new schemes to offset which focus on eco-balancing. This is about balancing emissions with solutions to try and counter those emissions. Mitigation, another term that's used quite a lot. Other sorts of solutions. Sequestration, the drawing in of carbon, usually by organic matter, trees, plants, salt marshes, seaweed, and so on and so forth. Drawdown, a whole philosophy about agriculture and how we need to change that in order to sequester more carbon. Carbon reduction, which is the third term that I'm going to focus on in the next slide, and really important for us to understand what that means. So we have all this new language, and undoubtedly there will be more new terms coming along. These have raised their head over the last couple of years. In the next couple of years, there will be a lot more. So what I would say is just pay attention to the language and to really understanding what these terms mean. But as I said, I'm going to focus on 3, which are most important for our travel emissions, and that's carbon offsetting, net zero, and carbon reduction. Can I have the next slide, please? Or carbon neutral, I should say. So when we are organising travel, I mentioned, individuals booking their own travel, but we can also, as businesses, organise travel. We're often confronted with, a variety of schemes. I know at AGF, A Greener Future, we are constantly emailed about new schemes to offset emissions. And some of them describe themselves as carbon neutral schemes, some of them as net zero carbon schemes, and very few but growing carbon reduction schemes. So what's the difference? Carbon neutral is the type of scheme where basically they will promise to offset your travel emissions. So we can do a calculation of the amount of emissions from travel, and they will usually say they're going to plant trees to offset those emissions. And it's done without really much thought to any other measures that can be put in place to reduce emissions. By contrast, net zero is about making as many changes as you can to practices to reduce as much of the emissions that you can before you resort to offsetting. Now, the difference, of course, is one that carbon neutral is easier. Measure your emissions, you know what you need to offset, you can pay the price. Net zero requires that you really study where your emissions are coming from and do what you can to reduce those emissions before you resort to offsetting. For example, it may be that there is a lot of flying within the business. A lot of people are flying. Is it possible to at least reduce the amount of flying and perhaps look at alternative trains, for example? Not always possible at all. If you're intercontinent, then that's not possible. But are there other options, such as trains, for travel that perhaps isn't quite so far? It's very easy to get onto a plane, but actually, and this is not every country, of course, but in most countries, the train is another option for distances that are within country and not too far. So that would be an example of looking at being mindful about travel, looking at other measures to reduce the amount of emissions from travel before you resort to offsetting the remainder. Now, both carbon neutral and net zero schemes look at balance. So I talked about eco-balance a few moments ago. So what they're both trying to do usually is present a scheme that takes away as much carbon as you're putting in through your travel, for example. So the balance is we're going to remove the amount of carbon that you've just generated from the travel that the flight that you've just made, for example, the flights you're booking. Carbon reduction is really where we're moving to very quickly, because we realize that climate change is not going to be solved by just balancing new emissions. Actually, what we've got to do is start removing a lot of the carbon that we've generated in the past and is still in the atmosphere. So carbon reduction is where we're moving to. It's still fairly early days, but really the schemes that are now emerging are tech solutions which focus on extraction of existing carbon from the atmosphere, not just balancing new carbon that we might generate from the flight that we make. And that's a very important distinction. And schemes are beginning to come on tap to actually provide those solutions for carbon reduction as opposed to just net zero or carbon neutral. Can I have the next slide, please? there are some issues with offsetting, and some of you may remember, I call it carbon offsetting 1.0, when carbon offsetting was around in the 1990s. And it sort of grew quite rapidly in the 1990s because of CSR reporting. It became a requirement in quite a lot of countries that, along with financial reporting, big organizations had to also provide corporate social responsibility reports along with their annual statements. And in doing so, there was a recognition that actually they needed to show some strategies, some progress in reducing the amount of carbon that the organization as a whole was generating. So these schemes emerged, quite a lot of them in the 1990s. They were all about tree planting. They were usually graded schemes, bronze, silver, gold, 1, 2, 3, platinum, those sorts of levels. And they were about tree planting schemes in often far off places, which you were assured, would offset as an organization a lot of your carbon, and you were doing good somehow. When it came to what the trees were and where they were being planted, that was often a difficult question to answer. And in quite a lot of examples, these companies actually weren't planting trees at all. Or if they were planting trees, they were planting the wrong trees in the wrong place. So these schemes under 1.0 came in under disrepute because they either didn't exist or they were probably doing more harm than good. So can I have the next slide, please? Moving on, in the last few years, we've moved into what I would call carbon offsetting 2.0. So what's the difference? Well, firstly, instead of just a promise that we're going to be planting a lot of trees somewhere, these schemes are usually now accompanied with some sort of scientific validity and legitimacy. So there is science behind the solution to actually validate what it's about and what it is achieving. It's often part of a wider international development program. It can also be seen as something called philanthropic capitalism. So these schemes are in poorer countries. They are often designed to help with perhaps developing crops and sort of tree-based crops, but they're often still trees that are planted. The other part of this is that it's sort of going a bit the same way as carbon offsetting 1.0, in that it's now lots of companies are springing up. It seems to be everywhere. You're invited to offset your emissions through lots of different things that you do, not only through airline travel, but actually all sorts of different travel. For example, coach travel is another one. So there are an awful lot of these schemes coming up under this latest version. Why is that? Well, because people recognize it's mainstream. It's not just for organizations, but it's also an easy way to actually do something. And we can feel good because we paid our extra money. We're told we're going to be offsetting our emissions. Makes us feel good that we're doing something. But actually, the problem is that we're not changing our behaviors, particularly, for example, if we are offsetting our flights. We'll carry on flying because we think that we're offsetting that and doing a good thing. We don't need to change the behavior. You can buy, in other words, carbon neutrality, and a big criticism of that whole approach is that it's tantamount to greenwashing. So you're saying that you're doing something, but really, is it making a difference? Are these schemes really doing what they say, by reducing the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, or even offsetting the amount that you've just generated with your travel. Can I have the next slide, please? And I want to just focus a little bit on the reason why offsetting through tree planting is problematic. And as I said, we get schemes in all the time, which are tree planting schemes for all sorts of different types of emission, not just travel, but for making clothing, for example. So we really need to understand, I think, a little bit more about what is problematic about tree planting. And don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of trees. I love trees. They do a lot to improve the quality of our air. But one thing they don't do is really compensate for anything real time. So tree planting is not a real time compensatory mode of reducing carbon in the atmosphere. It takes the average broadleaf tree 10 years to sequester, draw in 20 kilograms of carbon. 20 kilograms of carbon is nothing. It takes 100 years for the same tree to draw in 1 ton of carbon. And we're busy emitting thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon every year. So the important thing to understand is that tree planting is not a bad thing per se, but when you're invited to tick the box and pay your money to plant some trees, and then you're told that this will offset your travel, offset, manufacture of products or whatever, it's actually not true. Well, at least it's not true today. It's not true tomorrow. It might be true in 100 years' time. So it's not real time. It's not a solution to the really time critical problem that we have with climate change. Now the next slide, please. But of course, if you go for a tree planting scheme, what you can say is it's legacy. It's legacy planting for the future. It is a cheap thing to do. It does help deal with pollution. So we know that trees and hedges in cities in particular help deal with pollution and also heat. And they're good for our well-being. But it is legacy. It's for tomorrow. It's not going to really help us today. Have the next slide, please. So what sorts of things are going to out there that are going to help us for today? What can we do to not only reduce emissions from new travel, but what sort of solutions can help us with the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere? And I think if you're a business that is planning travel for your staff, or obviously for the management, it's worth really having a good look at the sorts of schemes now. And there are quite a lot of options before just going readily for the ready tree planting scheme. So these range from things like projects, and they're becoming quite commonplace. So for example, might be local community, solar panels on schools, it might be wind generation through windmills, it might be wave power. There's quite a lot of sort of renewable types, energy renewable type schemes that you can buy into through an offsetting scheme. And if you remember, I mentioned insetting. Insetting is becoming very popular because it's also local. Lots of these schemes are global, which is fair enough and happen in countries around the world. But actually what some organizations now prefer is to do something more locally. So they will look at schemes that are solutions that are really insetting schemes, which are local solutions. Other things we can actually now contribute to projects which are aimed at, for example, not cutting trees down, not digging up special eco environments, for example, marshland, heathland, which are all known to actually draw down quite a significant amount of carbon. So you can actually contribute to schemes that are preserving these things and not cutting trees down rather than planting trees. But I mentioned the 100-year-old tree. Well, the 100-year-old tree is sequestering a ton of carbon. And if you have a forest of those, that's quite a lot. As I said, it takes 100 years to get there. So what is better? Don't plant them, just don't cut them down in the first place. So there are schemes available to do that. But increasingly now we're seeing new schemes coming along, and these are the big tech solutions. These are the ones, is carbon reduction, which is about extracting a large amount of carbon that already exists in the atmosphere, because this is what we've got to do. You know, we are probably beyond 1.5 increase in global temperatures now. We're not more looking at 2 degrees or more. So what can we do on a much bigger scale to try and halt this? Well, the thinking now is that it has to be carbon reduction solutions. They have to be big tech solutions. And this is about taking existing carbon out of the atmosphere and sequestering them into mines or storing it in other ways under the ocean and in numerous ways, which actually are dealing with the problem right now. So these schemes are becoming more commonplace. They are still relatively new, but what I'd advise is that if it's your responsibility or your organization that's booking a lot of travel quite often, just look around. Don't just go for the tree planting solution. Look around at all the other options that are beginning to come along, and even ask for things like carbon capture schemes, carbon reduction solutions, because they are out there, and there are quite a few companies that are available and can do this. Well, that is the end of my presentation. I'm sorry, I just focused on one thing, but I think it's very pertinent to travel and transport within the industry. And I hope I've shed a little bit of light on some of those options and also some of the terminology. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Teresa. Very insightful presentation as well. And let's have a look if we've got any questions. We have one at the moment from Georgia, friend, who's asking, as this data, referring to the beginning of the presentation, as the data is from 2016, would it say airlines have become more green and eco-friendly?
Sorry, I missed the middle part of that sentence. It went.
Sorry, if as the data is from 2016, would it be fair to say airlines have become more green and eco-friendly?
I don't think so. Actually, I think for them to become more green and eco-friendly on any sizable scale, significant scale, there needs to be really a change in the fuel. And this is where a lot of work is being done at the moment to look at other non-fossil fuel, non-petroleum sources. So, for example, hydrogen. There's a lot of HVO is another one, a lot of testing of different types of fuel which aren't fossil fuel based, and that will really make a difference. So I think that, those solutions will come along, and there's a lot of work being done now to try and find alternative sources of fuel which are clean sources of fuel. And I don't believe that we will have to stop flying, heaven forbid. I love to travel as much as the next person. But what I would say in the meantime is that we need to think about these different ways of offsetting those inevitable emissions and being more mindful if we are in a position where we're booking lots of travel, to think, you know, do we need that many flights? If it's more local, are there other ways of getting there? So I realize that's 2016. The data was continually going up, but I didn't have credible figures up until prior to COVID. And of course, we're in a transition phase at the moment. But I think they are representative, which is why I included them.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions?
I actually have one question, Olga. Sorry, I haven't typed it out. Teresa, you mentioned a lot about planting trees and how it's not for the short term, but for the long term.
Yes.
What can we do as an industry?
Yes.
To support the short term, where you also mentioned you love flying, you love going on holiday, and obviously our industry, from an incentive travel perspective, is very much for not just flying, but transport as a whole. So what recommendations would you give?
So I think, as I was saying, the first instance, you know, you will, it's your industry, so you're booking travel, but look at what the options are, rather than, you know, reach for the plane. Are there electric travel options for more local travel? For example, I'm going to be giving a presentation in Germany in 2 weeks' time, and I've just booked train travel throughout. Actually, it would be faster to travel by plane for me to go to Germany, but we actually have a no-fly policy in my organisation, so we use train travel. But that's not possible, you know, if you're doing intercontinental travel. So it's just cutting the emissions where you can, more of the net zero approach rather than the carbon neutral, reduce as much as you can, and then look at the variety of schemes that are coming on tap. So, you know, tree planting is the most common one, but if you search around, there are other options. There are project-based options, for example, you know, local projects, solar with school and things like that. But I think more importantly now for this industry, looking at the carbon reduction, the big carbon reduction options, which I think can have a significant impact. And there are, you know, I know companies in the UK, but I would, you know, I'm quite convinced that there are companies in the US and Canada and you know, around the world that are looking at this and are already offering schemes for carbon reduction. So it's just spreading the net further and going into it more deeply, really, to find out what's available, you know, for your organisation to offset. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa, for highlighting various offsetting projects as well, which is really helpful. Also, maybe local rewilding projects could be an option. A kind of a more short.
I would put that caveat in about look at those very carefully as well, because you know, the list I didn't put up was the list of terminology to do with rewilding, which is also a growing list of terms which are not clear always exactly what's going on there either. So rewilding, but look into it, find out exactly what's happening.
And what is a good source of information for us to acquire knowledge about all of the terminology? Is there some sort of a approved place where we can go to as industry get information about any ambiguity, any ambiguous terms?
Well, you can go to our website. The reason why I have produced this list, and I've used it elsewhere, is because the introduction of new language is happening so quickly, and I realized there wasn't a comprehensive glossary of terms anywhere that covered all of this new language. to give a good explanation of what it all meant. So you will see bits and pieces in various websites, green websites, with explanations for some of it, like scope 1, 2, and 3. You can find that. Separately, you'll find things like carbon insetting, but they're not at the moment all gathered together in one place. So that's why I've done that job. And I know a few other people are working on that as well. But that will come, and I think that, you know, that's something that we will have on our website at A Greener Future. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Teresa. I don't think we've got any more questions. So that's great. Thank you for the very insightful presentation. And I just have the last but not least words that I would like to pass on to Mary and Liz, who are going to talk about Site Global Earth Day initiative.
Oh, hi again all. It's Mary here, and I wanted to share with you a very exciting project that we are undertaking this year. And that is a concerted effort to enhance the 2022 Canadian plant-based cookbook and make this a global project. What we are doing, or what we are preparing, is our resources, our templates, and our portals, and which will be sent out to those of you who are on this call, and to, of course, our chapters and our board. And this will guide you to help us create this recipe book. And we ask that you create a recipe, plant-based, and you can do it as a chapter, or you can do it individually, or you can do it as a CSR event, whichever way you feel, and submit the cookbook, or the recipe, excuse me, via our portal. Liz will share with you the inception of this cookbook, and we will take it from there.
Thank you, Mary. There we go. Thanks, everybody. This is actually just a photo of our cover of our plant-based wonderful menu plant-based book. And this was actually born from Earth Day. We wanted to create something that was impactful, and it was a collaborative effort of our chapter and our sustainability committee, and we produced an incredible 37-page cookbook, of which, with the objective with this is to have smart choices with our food choices to reduce our emissions and the impacts that we can have. And we partnered actually with Iconic Wineries, which was fantastic, an organic winery, and it's been a great success. So we thought it would be a great initiative to offer this to our chapters around the global chapters. And next slide, we can you'll just see a few other recipes that we have. So that's available, our Canadian, but as Mary said, we will have a portal to submit recipes, and us just all working together to become more conscious of our food choices and how we can reduce food waste and prepare more plant-based and reducing our food intake, our meat intake, which again affects the methane in our emissions. So it'll be a great project, and happy Earth Month to everybody. We hope you'll contribute, and thank you for joining us. I think there's one more slide to come. And this just
there is, and that is going to be the template. Yes, this is the template that will be forwarded, on which you can type your recipe and make some notes on it. And one interesting point that I just wanted to make, that just listening to Ben's presentation, if you are reusing or anything, or if there's something special about the recipe based on what you heard today, please feel free to make a note. As you can see, there's a note that was written on the right-hand side, eating this filling oatmeal, etc., etc. You can certainly put in notes there, and it would be great to see what people do with leftovers, or non-wasting, or whatever the situation may be. But this is actually the template that we will ask people to use. The instructions are clear on the following page. So you'll have all the tools you need to be able to submit your recipe. Really, the only thing you need to do is create your recipe and cook it, or make it.
Make it
Or
and
something.
share it. Yes,
And share it.
Yeah,
And share
and
it.
a huge actually shout out to Liz Holtby who really helped shape
Yes.
many hours she contributed to our Canadian cookbook. And again, it's been a great success, and we look forward to expanding this within the global community, all learning together and enjoying some delicious recipes and reducing our emissions and food waste.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. Oh, was there a question?
Amazing. Thank you, ladies. That carrot cake picture looks so yummy.
Yeah, from Leanne. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I think I might prepare that maybe for tomorrow. Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. I don't think we've got any more questions, but you can always, if you think of anything, you can always reach out to us. And we are going to be following up with the link to the recording of the webinar, as well as the Earth Day initiative template for you to use. Start getting busy with your zero waste recipes, please, and let's just get this really amazing global cookbook going and inspire everybody. And as we mentioned at the beginning, please do hop on board with your suggestions on how we can theme next webinars on sustainability and incentive travel, because your opinions really what matters. We're designing them for you, sorry. So if you have any particular topics you would like to cover, presenters you would like us to invite, case studies you would like to showcase, please do come forward, and we'll make sure that we'll incorporate everything. So we'll be sending a survey with the link. We'll really appreciate your time, a few minutes, if you can fill it out. Thank you, everybody, and our lovely presenters for being with us today, and all of my colleagues for making this happen, and of course our audience to giving us your precious time.